Reese Calloway's knees pressed into cold concrete, her fingers scraping at the decades-old foundation as dust billowed up in the beam of her headlamp. The basement of Pine Ridge Lodge smelled like death postponed a tomb that had kept its secret through 30 winters and 30 springs. Above her footsteps creaked across warped floorboards. Quinn's voice drifted down thin with fear, cutting through the darkness like a prayer no one would answer. "Mom, there's someone outside." The cassette player beside Reese's excavation site hissed with static before a man's voice emerged, fractured by time and terror. "If anyone finds this, you need to know they're going to kill me. And the man who owns this place, he knows. Edmund Calloway knows everything." Reese's breath caught, her grandfather's name spoken by a dead man. The sound of an engine cut through the October night. Headlights swept across the boarded windows. Reese looked up, toward the stairs, toward her daughter, toward the choice that had brought them here. Her hands were covered in concrete dust and something darker. Something that might have been dried blood, or might have been rust, or might have been the residue of a lie that had lasted longer than most marriages. She'd come here to sell a building. Instead, she'd found a grave. 3 months earlier, Reese had stood in a studio apartment in southeast Portland, surrounded by cardboard boxes that represented the archaeology of a failed life. The lease ended in 4 days. Her bank account held $847, the last remnant of a career that had imploded like a controlled demolition, all the structural supports kicked out in a single afternoon. Quinn sat cross-legged on the floor, her dark hair falling forward as she sketched on printer paper salvaged from the recycling bin. The drawing showed a house the kind children conjure from shapes that exist only in imagination. A triangle roof, a square body, a curling line of smoke from a chimney that looked more like a broken antenna. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors along a fence that couldn't possibly stand. "Mom, when we get a real house, can I have a dog?" Reese folded another sweater into a box already too full, the fabric compressing under her palms. 6 months since the divorce papers. 4 months since Derek had stopped returning calls about child support. 3 months since the Oregonian's senior editor had walked her to the door after her expose on city council corruption had collapsed under the weight of insufficient evidence and threatened litigation. 2 weeks since she'd sold her car to pay September's rent. "Maybe, sweetheart, we'll see." The kind of answer adults give when the truth is too heavy to lift. Quinn looked up her 9-year-old face too, knowing too practiced at reading the space between her mother's words. The knock on the door made them both jump. The envelope bore the letterhead of Whitmore and Associates, attorneys at law. Inside, a single sheet informed Reese that Edmund Calloway, deceased as of August 14th, had bequeathed to his granddaughter the full rights and title to Pine Ridge Lodge, Cedar Falls, Oregon, including all structures and the surrounding 340 acres. Reese stood in the narrow kitchen that smelled like other people's cooking, staring at words that made no sense. Edmund had 3 children. She was only a granddaughter, a secondary heir at best. And yet here was her name typed in serif font attached to a property she barely remembered visiting as a child. Quinn appeared at her elbow, straining to see. "What is it?" The lawyer's office occupied the 3rd floor of a building that had been elegant in 1987 and had spent the subsequent decades fighting a losing battle against entropy. The waiting room smelled like old carpet and desperation. Reese filled out forms while Quinn colored in a magazine with a pen someone had left on the side table. Victor Landry walked in like he owned the air itself, 6 feet of tailored confidence in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Reese's entire wardrobe. He stopped when he saw her surprise flickering across his face before smoothing into something that might have been sympathy if it hadn't been so practiced. "Reese, I didn't expect to see you here." Her uncle had been handsome once before. Success had hardened him into something ornamental and cold. They'd seen each other perhaps 5 times in the last decade, always at family gatherings where he arrived late and left early, always with a different woman on his arm, always checking his phone, like the present moment was just an inconvenient pause between more important things. "Uncle Victor." He glanced at Quinn, then back at Reese with the quick assessment of someone calculating value. "So the old man left you the lodge. That's unexpected. Edmund always was sentimental about you." He sat down across from her, crossing his legs with the casual authority of someone who'd never waited for anything. "Look, I'll save us both some time. The place has been closed since 1994. It's a liability, structurally unsound, probably full of mold, and God knows what else. You're unemployed, raising a kid alone. I'm offering $200,000 cash, closing within the week. You take the money, get yourself back on your feet, and we both move on." Reese had looked up the property before coming. The land alone was worth close to $600,000. The buildings, even in disrepair, added value. "That's a generous offer." Victor smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. It's the only offer. Reese, you're a smart woman. Think about what you can do with that money. A fresh start. Maybe get Quinn into a better school district. I know Derek hasn't been. He paused delicately. I know things have been difficult. The lawyer appeared at the door calling Reese's name. She stood gathering her purse, gesturing him for Quinn to follow. I'll think about it. Victor's smile tightened. Don't think too long. Opportunity has a short shelf life. I'll need an answer in a week. The lawyer's office was smaller than the waiting room, dominated by a desk piled with accordion files and yellow legal pads. Martin Hendricks looked like he'd been born wearing reading glasses, his white hair combed straight back, his fingers ink-stained from an era when lawyers still wrote by hand. He slid a folder across the desk. Everything's in order. The deed transfers to you immediately. There are some outstanding property taxes, roughly $8,000, but otherwise the title is clear. Reese opened the folder, scanning documents that represented something she didn't want and couldn't afford. My grandfather, did he say why he left it to me? Why not my uncle or my mother? Hendricks leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking. Edmund came to see me 6 weeks before he died. He was very specific about his wishes. He said, the lawyer paused, pulling a handwritten note from beneath the property deed. He said you were the only one who would understand what needed to be done. The words made no sense. Reese hadn't spoken to Edmund in 2 years, hadn't seen him in 5. They'd been close when she was young, before life had pulled them into separate orbits, but understanding they'd barely known each other as adults. Hendricks pushed a sealed envelope across the desk. Her name was written on the front in Edmund's careful cursive. He asked me to give you this, said not to open it until you were at the lodge. The envelope was thick, something solid inside. Reese turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of intention, the burden of last words. Quinn tugged at her sleeve. Mom, what's a lodge? It's like a hotel, baby, where people used to stay. Are we going to live there? Hendricks interjected before Reese could answer. I should mention your Uncle Victor has made several offers to purchase the property over the years. Edmund always refused. He was quite adamant about that. The drive to Cedar Falls took 3 hours, winding through valleys where lumber towns had calcified into collections of chain restaurants and evangelical churches. Quinn fell asleep against the window, her breath fogging the glass. Reese drove with the envelope on the passenger seat. Edmund's final words sealed in paper, waiting for a moment she wasn't sure she wanted to arrive. The turnoff to Pine Ridge Lodge was barely marked, a wooden sign so weathered the letters had become suggestions. The access road was gravel that had surrendered to potholes and encroaching blackberry vines. The forest pressed close, Douglas fir and hemlock, creating a canopy that turned afternoon into dusk. Then the trees opened up, and there it was. Pine Ridge Lodge looked like abandonment given physical form. 2 wings of single-story rooms extended from a central office building, the whole structure forming a shallow U around a courtyard of cracked asphalt and dead grass. White paint had peeled away to gray wood beneath, creating a patchy, diseased appearance. 7 of the 12 windows were broken, the glass long since carried away by winter vandalism. The sign that had once announced vacancies, now hung by a single chain, the rest of it collapsed into the weeds below. Reese pulled up to what had been the main entrance and cut the engine. Silence rushed in, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the distant complaint of crows. Quinn woke slowly, rubbing her eyes. This it? The disappointment in her daughter's voice was a knife between Reese's ribs. Yeah, baby, this is it. It looks like a place where ghosts live. Out of the mouths of children, truth arrives unvarnished. Reese got out of the car, her shoes crunching on gravel mixed with broken glass. The air smelled like rot and pine sap, the particular scent of the Pacific Northwest when nature starts reclaiming what humans abandon. Ivy had conquered the porch pillars, thick as a man's arm, strangling the wood beneath. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. She opened the envelope. Inside was a brass key with no number, worn smooth by decades of handling. Beneath it, a note in Edmund's handwriting. Reese, don't sell to Victor. Don't trust him. Find room 6. I'm sorry for everything. Grandpa. Room 6. Reese looked at the row of doors stretching away from the office. Numbers were still visible on some 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the left wing. Then on the right, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Her eyes tracked back and forth between the 2 wings. There was no room 6. Quinn appeared at her side, taking her hand. Mom, can we go inside? The office door resisted, swollen with moisture, then surrendered with a groan that sounded like a warning. Inside, dust hung in the air like snow that had forgotten how to fall. The check-in desk remained in place, its surface covered in mouse droppings and the desiccated corpses of flies. Behind it, a keyboard held a dozen hooks, most empty, a few still clutching keys attached to plastic tags. Quinn moved toward the desk, drawn by the kind of curiosity that makes children fearless. She ran her finger through the dust, leaving a trail. This place is really old. 23 years since anyone stayed here. Reese found the logbook beneath the counter, its pages brittle with age. She opened it carefully, watching names and dates scroll past the Johnsons from Tacoma, checking in for a weekend in June 1993. The Hartley family. August of that year, 3 nights. Page after page of lives passing through, each one documented in Edmund's careful hand, until October 1993. Then the entries stopped. The last page had been torn out. Only fragments remained, caught in the binding. Reese could make out parts of letters, the loop of what might have been a capital G, the straight edge of an H. Someone had removed the record, deliberately tearing close to the spine. Quinn's voice called from across the lobby. "Mom, look at this!" She stood at a framed map of the property, yellowed behind cracked glass. The map showed the lodge's layout, the office building, the 2 wings of rooms, the parking area, the maintenance shed out back. Quinn's finger traced the left wing, counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then she jumped to the right wing. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. "Mom, why isn't there a 6? Reese studied the map. Between rooms 5 and 7 there was space, maybe 10 feet of wall. But on the map, nothing. Just the exterior line of the building, as if that section didn't exist. The brass key in her pocket felt heavier. "I don't know, baby. Let's go look." The courtyard was worse in daylight, every crack and weed a testimony to time's patient destruction. They walked past the empty pool, filled now with leaves, and a rusted shopping cart someone had thrown in as a final insult. The doors to the rooms hung open or missing, entirely revealing interiors, stripped by scavengers and decay. Room 5's door was intact but unlocked. Inside, a bed frame without a mattress, a dresser with all its drawers gone, wallpaper curling away like dead skin. Nothing unusual. Room 7 showed similar devastation. Water damage had collapsed part of the ceiling, exposing beams and insulation that hung down like gray intestines. But between them, the wall. Reese stood in the courtyard, measuring with her eyes. From the exterior, the distance between Room 5's door and Room 7's door was at least 15 feet. But inside, the walls were only 8 feet apart. 7 feet of space missing, hidden behind drywall and siding. Quinn ran to the wall, pressing her palms against it. "It sounds different here." She was right. When Reese knocked on the wall near Room 5, the sound was solid, dense. But in the middle section, the knock produced an echo, a hollowness that suggested empty space beyond. "There's something behind here." A voice spoke from behind them, rough as gravel and aged like whiskey. "Your grandfather sealed that room up 30 years ago. Told me if I wanted to keep working here, I'd never ask why." Reese spun around. The man standing at the edge of the courtyard was in his late 60s, tall and lean, with white hair pulled back in a ponytail and hands that looked like they'd shaken hands with every kind of hard work. He wore canvas pants and a flannel shirt, faded to near transparency, work boots caked in sawdust. "Who are you?" "Dutch Carmichael. Worked here from 85 to 94 doing maintenance repairs, whatever Edmund needed." He walked closer, his eyes moving over the buildings with something like grief. "Heard he passed. Heard you inherited. Figured you'd show up eventually." Quinn moved closer to Reese, wary of strangers in the way children become after divorce teaches them the world isn't safe. Dutch noticed and stopped walking. "Didn't mean to startle you. I live about 3 miles down the road. Still do carpentry work when folks need it. Brought some tools in case you wanted to open the place up, see what's salvageable." He gestured to a pickup truck parked near the office, its bed filled with toolboxes and equipment. Reese pulled the key from her pocket. "Do you know what this opens?" Dutch's face changed, something tightening around his eyes. "Where'd you get that?" "My grandfather left it for me, with a note telling me to find Room 6. The old man was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Reese to the wall between Rooms 5 and 7, then back again. "That key opens a door that hasn't been opened since October 9th, 1993. I know because I was here that night. Edmund called me at 3 in the morning, told me to bring plywood and nails, said we had to close something up, had to make it disappear." "What was it?" "Edmund never told me, but I heard him in there sawing, hammering for 6 hours straight. When he finally came out, he looked like he'd aged a decade. He handed me $200 cash and made me promise I'd never speak about what we'd done. He was crying. I'd known Edmund Calloway for 10 years at that point, and I'd never seen him cry." Quinn tugged at Reese's sleeve. "Mom, I'm scared." Reese knelt down, taking her daughter's hands. "It's okay. We're just going to look. If you want, you can wait in the car. But Quinn shook her head, her jaw set with the particular stubbornness she'd inherited from her father. I want to stay with you. Dutch retrieved a crowbar from his truck. The three of them stood in front of the wall looking at weathered siding that had been designed to blend seamlessly with the rest of the building. Up close, Reese could see where the seams were where newer wood had been fitted into older framing. You sure you want to do this? Reese thought about the note about Edmund's apology, about Victor's too quick offer and too convenient timing. Truth has weight. Lies create vacuums. She'd spent her career chasing the former and exposing the latter. This wall was a lie made physical. Open it. The crowbar shrieked against nails that had rusted into the wood. Dutch worked methodically, prying away one board, then another, creating an opening large enough to see through. Behind the exterior siding was more wood and interior wall, and in that interior wall a door. It was painted green, or had been once. Now the paint was cracked and peeling, revealing wood grain beneath. The doorknob was tarnished brass, probably original to when the lodge was built in 1967. There was no number on the door, nothing to identify it except its absence from every map and record. Dutch pulled away more boards until the door was fully exposed. Reese stepped forward, the key in her hand catching the late afternoon light. She slid it into the lock. The mechanism resisted, then turned with a click that sounded like a coffin opening. The door swung inward on hinges that screamed. Darkness beyond thick and absolute. A smell rolled out, not of death exactly, but of time sealed away air that had been breathing itself for 30 years. Reese pulled out her phone, activating the flashlight. The beam cut through dust motes dancing in air currents. The room was small, maybe 12 by 14 feet. A bed frame, iron painted white, bolted to the floor. A desk against the far wall, heavy wood, probably oak. A single chair. No television, no telephone, no decorations. The window had been boarded over from the outside, only cracks of light penetrating the gaps. This wasn't a hotel room. It was a cell. Quinn's voice was barely a whisper. Why is the bed stuck to the floor? Reese didn't have an answer. She stepped inside, her footprints marking the dust. The bed held no mattress, just the metal frame with springs that had rusted into lace. On the nightstand, a glass of water sat next to a notepad. The water had evaporated decades ago, leaving mineral deposits in a ring. The notepad held a single page with handwriting. They're coming. Tell Evelyn I'm... The sentence ended mid-word, as if the writer had been interrupted. Dutch stood in the doorway, not entering. Jesus Christ. Edmund, what did you do? On the desk, Reese found a check-in slip, the kind hotels used before computers. It was filled out in different handwriting than Edmund's, written in October 1993. Name Garrett M. Brennan. Address Portland, Oregon. Room number 6. Checkout date blank. Beside the slip, a cassette tape. Sony, the kind people used for interviews before digital recorders. Someone had written on the label in shaky letters, "If found, listen." And next to the tape, a wristwatch. Timex men's, the kind with a leather band. The hands had stopped at 3:47. Whether that was AM or PM, there was no way to know. Quinn reached for the tape, but Reese caught her hand. Don't touch anything yet. Who's Garrett Brennan? I don't know, baby. But she did know, in the way that journalists know things before the evidence confirms it. This room was a crime scene. The boarded window, the bolted bed, the interrupted note, all of it pointed toward something terrible that had happened here, something Edmund had hidden behind drywall and silence. Dutch's voice came from behind them. I remember that name. October 93. A man checked in quiet type said he was here on business. Edmund mentioned him once, said the guy was asking a lot of questions about the town, about land deals. Then one day he was just gone. Edmund told me the man had checked out early, left in the night. Did you see him leave? No, but Edmund said... Dutch stopped, his face going pale. Oh God. Edmund said he left. But if this room has been sealed since that night... Reese finished the thought. Then Garrett Brennan never left at all. They found a cassette player in the office, an old Sony boombox that had been sitting on a shelf since the Clinton administration. Reese loaded the tape, her hands steadier than her heartbeat. Quinn sat on the floor, her knees pulled up to her chest. Dutch stood by the window, looking out at the gathering dusk. Reese pressed play. Static, first the hiss of magnetic tape that had been sitting in silence for 3 decades. Then a voicemail, middle-aged, with the careful diction of someone who knows they might only get one chance to be heard. My name is Garrett Michael Brennan. Today is October 7th, 1993. I'm a private investigator based in Portland, Oregon. I've been locked in this room for 48 hours. There's no phone. The window is nailed shut from the outside. The door is locked from the hall. Quinn's hand found Reese's, squeezing tight. I was hired by a law firm representing the Cascade Valley Environmental Coalition. They suspected corruption in the sale of Pine Ridge State Park land to a development corporation. 340 acres of public land sold for 30 cents on the dollar to Cascade Development Corporation. I spent 8 months investigating, following the money recording, conversations, building a case. Garrett's voice was steady, professional, but underneath ran a current of fear. Cascade Development is owned by Victor Landry and several silent partners. They bribed 4 of the 5 Cedar Falls City Council members, paying a total of $2.1 million to push through the sale. They laundered the money through legitimate construction projects, making it look clean. They used this lodge as a meeting place somewhere off the public record. Reese felt her stomach drop. Victor Landry, her uncle, the owner of this lodge, Edmund Calloway, he wasn't part of the original conspiracy, but they paid him $75,000 to look the other way, to let them use the place for meetings. He needed the money. His wife had just died of cancer, the medical bills nearly bankrupted him. So he took their money and he kept quiet. Dutch made a sound like a wounded animal. I checked in here 3 days ago as a regular customer. But the first night I heard them in room 12 talking about the final payment, about covering their tracks. I recorded everything. I had documentation, bank records, canceled checks, proof that would have sent them all to prison. On the tape, there was a pause, the sound of Garrett drinking something, swallowing hard. The next morning, 3 men came to my room. One of them was Victor Landry. They took my files, my recording equipment, everything. But they don't know I already mailed copies to my wife, Evelyn. She has instructions to open a safety deposit box at First National Bank in Portland if I don't call her by October 10th. The account number is 847392. Everything is there. All the evidence they think they've destroyed. Quinn was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Reese put an arm around her daughter but couldn't look away from the boombox, couldn't stop the tape. They've locked me in here. Edmund brings me food, water. He apologizes every time, says he didn't know it would go this far, says he never wanted anyone to get hurt, but he's too afraid to help me escape. They've threatened his family, his granddaughter, a little girl named Reese. The world tilted. Reese heard her own name coming from a dead man's mouth, heard the moment her grandfather chose silence over justice, heard the transaction that had saved her life while costing Garrett Brennan his. I'm scared. I have a wife, an 8-year-old son named Connor. I promised them I'd come home, but I don't think. The recording cut off abruptly. Sounds of a door opening, multiple footsteps, a new voice, harder, commanding. Brennan, time's up. Garrett's voice desperate now, all professionalism gone. No, wait, I won't talk. I swear I'll sign whatever you want. The second voice colder. You know too much. We gave you a chance to walk away. Please, I have a family. Evelyn, tell her I. A sound like a hammer hitting a watermelon. A scream cut short, then dragging the scrape of something heavy being pulled across the floor. Edmund's voice breaking. Oh God, what have we done? The tape went silent. Reese stood frozen, the room spinning around her. Quinn sobbed against her side. Dutch had sunk into a chair, his face in his hands. 30 years ago in this room, a man had been murdered, and her grandfather had helped hide it. Reese spent that night in the office, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything except Garrett Brennan's voice and the sound that had followed. Quinn finally passed out on a sleeping bag Dutch had brought from his truck, exhausted by fear and confusion. Dutch himself had gone home after promising to return in the morning, his face gray as ash. Alone in the dark, Reese went back to room 6. She pulled out her phone, photographing everything. The check-in slip, the watch, the notepad, the tape. She worked systematically, documenting every detail the way she'd been trained, building a case the way Garrett Brennan had tried to build his. Then she searched. Behind the desk, a panel in the wall looked different from the others. Reese ran her fingers along the edges, finding a seam. She worked a fingernail into the gap and pulled. The panel came away, revealing a cavity behind the drywall. Inside, a plastic tube, the kind used to protect architectural drawings. Reese pulled it out, her heart hammering. The cap was sealed with duct tape that had brittled with age. She peeled it away and dumped the contents onto the desk. Documents, dozens of them, photocopied bank statements showing wire transfers from shell corporations to individual accounts, canceled checks made out to city council members, meeting notes in various handwriting, photographs of men in suits standing around a table covered with cash, and in one photograph taken with a telephoto lens through a window, 5 men at a table. Reese recognized two of them, Victor Landry younger, but unmistakable, and Edmund Calloway, her grandfather, his hand on a stack of bills, his face twisted in an expression that might have been shame, or might have been fear, or might have been the moment a good man realized he'd become something else. At the bottom of the tube, 3 USB drives and another cassette tape. This one's label read, Recording 2, Final Warning. Reese tried to load it into the boombox, but the tape was damaged, the ribbon inside crumpled, and separated from the spool. 30 years had not been kind to magnetic media. She gathered everything, stuffing it back into the tube, then carrying it to the office. She needed time to think, to process, to figure out what to do with information that could destroy what was left of her family. In the office desk, she found a cardboard box filled with Edmund's personal effects. Old receipts, unpaid bills from 1994, a bottle of Jack Daniels half empty, and at the bottom a stack of letters all addressed to Garrett Brennan, all unsent. Reese opened the first one, dated November 15th, 1993, 1 month after the murder. Garrett, I don't know how to begin. Maybe with the truth I am a coward. I stood by while they hurt you. I heard your voice begging and I did nothing. They threatened my family, threatened. Reese said they would hurt a child if I interfered. So I chose silence. I chose my blood over your life. How do I carry that? She opened another, dated February 1994. Day 847 since that night. I count each one. I can't sleep without hearing your voice. I have a family. You said that and it meant nothing to them. I should have done something. Anything. But I was afraid, and fear makes monsters of men who believe themselves good. Letter after letter, Edmund's confession written to a dead man. Apologies that would never be read, guilt that had festered for decades. In the last letter, dated July 2024, just weeks before Edmund's death, he wrote, I've hidden the evidence where Reese will find it. I can't undo what happened, but I can give her the truth. She'll know what to do with it. She's braver than I ever was. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. It just waits for someone strong enough to dig it up. Reese set the letters aside, tears blurring her vision. Her grandfather hadn't been a villain. He'd been a man who made an impossible choice and spent the rest of his life paying for it. But that didn't change what needed to happen next. She pulled out her phone and searched for Garrett Brennan. The results appeared immediately: a missing persons report from October 1993, a small article in the Cedar Falls Gazette about a Portland investigator who'd vanished without a trace. There was a photo, grainy and scanned from newsprint. Garrett Brennan, 41, smiling in a professional headshot, dark hair going gray at the temples, kind eyes, alive once, before this place, before Victor, before Edmund's silence. The article mentioned his widow Evelyn Brennan and a son, Connor, 8 years old. Reese did the math. Connor would be 41 now, maybe still in Portland, maybe still wondering what happened to his father. She searched for Evelyn Brennan and found an obituary from 2023, dead less than a year ago at 74. The obituary mentioned she was survived by her son Connor, a cardiologist in Seattle. Reese's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Victor. I know you're at the lodge. We need to talk. Don't do anything stupid. She stared at the screen. He knew. Of course he knew. This was his town, his property deal, his secret. He'd probably been watching the place for years, waiting to see if Edmund would ever talk, if the past would ever surface. Another text arrived. 2 weeks. That's how long my offer stands. After that, things get complicated. Reese looked at Quinn, still sleeping, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. She looked at the box of Edmund's letters, at the tube of evidence, at the cassette tape that held a dead man's final words. The journalist in her knew what came next. Exposure, investigation, justice, if such a thing still existed for crimes this old. But the mother in her remembered the men on the tape, their casual brutality, their willingness to kill, and remembered that they were still out there, still powerful, still willing to do whatever it took to protect their secret. She texted back, I need time to think. The response came immediately. Time is a luxury neither of us can afford. Then another message. Quinn is lovely, by the way, 9 years old, Riverside Elementary. Mrs. Patterson's 4th grade class. She takes the bus home, Route 47. You should be careful. The world is dangerous for little girls. Reese's blood turned to ice. The phone shook in her hand. He was threatening Quinn. Not subtly, not indirectly, a direct threat against her daughter. She texted back with shaking fingers, stay away from my daughter. Then stay away from the past. Some things are better left buried. Reese sat in the dark weighing choices. She could call the police, but Victor had already mentioned the sheriff took money from Cascade Development. She could call the FBI, but with what proof? A 30-year-old cassette tape and some documents that might not be admissible. She could go to the press, but she'd been fired from the press and her credibility was shot. Or she could take the money and run. $200,000, maybe 150 after taxes, enough to start over somewhere far from here, somewhere Victor Landry's shadow didn't reach. But then what? Live knowing she'd buried Garrett Brennan a second time? Teach Quinn that truth matters right up until it becomes inconvenient. Dawn broke over the Cascade Mountains, gray light filtering through dirty windows. Quinn stirred, waking slowly. Mom, I'm here, baby. Are we going home? Reese looked around the office at the lodge that had become a tomb at the evidence that could blow apart her family and maybe get them killed in the process. I don't know yet. Dutch arrived at 8, his truck loaded with cleaning supplies and tools. He'd brought coffee and breakfast sandwiches from a place in town still hot. They ate in silence, the three of them, while the morning grew lighter and the choice grew heavier. Finally, Dutch spoke. What are you going to do? Reese pulled out the cassette tape, the documents, the photographs. I'm going to finish what Garrett Brennan started. Dutch nodded slowly. That's going to be dangerous. I know. Victor has connections, money. He's not going to let this go without a fight. I know that too. Quinn put down her sandwich. Mom, I'm scared. Reese pulled her daughter close. Me too. But sometimes being scared is what happens when you're about to do something brave. That night, Reese called the number Evelyn Brennan had listed in her obituary. A man answered on the third ring. Hello. Is this Connor Brennan? Who's calling? My name is Reese Calloway. I'm calling about your father. Connor Brennan's voice carried the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust unexpected phone calls. The silence after Reese introduced herself stretched long enough that she wondered if he'd hung up. My father has been dead for 31 years. What could you possibly have to tell me about him? He's not dead, not officially. He's missing, and I know where he is. The line went quiet again, but this time she could hear breathing, could feel the weight of hope warring with decades of disappointment. Who are you? My name is Reese Calloway. My grandfather owned Pine Ridge Lodge in Cedar Falls. Your father was staying there when he disappeared. I found room 6. The sharp intake of breath told her everything. Connor knew about the room. Or at least he'd heard his mother mention it, had seen her awake from nightmares about doors that wouldn't open and calls that never came. What did you find? Reese looked at Quinn, asleep on the floor of the office, then at Dutch, standing by the window, his face carved from guilt and moonlight. Everything. The cassette tapes, the documents he hid, and I think I know where he is. Connor's voice broke. My mother died last year. She spent 3 decades believing my father abandoned us, that he chose something else over his family. I became a doctor because I wanted to be the kind of man she said he was, not the kind who runs away. If you're telling me she was right all along. She was. Your father was a hero. He died trying to expose corruption, and the people who killed him are still out there. Who? Reese told him. About Victor, about the development deal, about Edmund's complicity and regret, about Clayton Mercer and the empire built on blood money and silence. Connor listened without interrupting, and when she finished, his voice had gone cold and hard. What do you need from me? Your mother had a key to a bank vault in Portland. Your father mentioned it on the tape. He said everything was there. I have it. She gave it to me before she died, made me promise I'd open it someday. I never did. I was afraid of what I'd find. I need what's inside. When Buster, tomorrow, can you meet me in Portland? I'll be there. Margot Riley arrived at Pine Ridge Lodge the next morning, driving a Subaru held together by bumper stickers and optimism. She was 24 with dark hair cut short and eyes that took in everything with the intensity of someone who'd learned the world makes more sense through a camera lens. She'd driven 3 hours from Eugene after Reese had found her through a journalism forum where young reporters shared war stories about impossible sources and editors who didn't understand that truth requires patience. Dutch was replacing window glass in room 4 when Margot pulled up. He watched her get out, hauling equipment bags and a laptop case, and shook his head. You sure about bringing in outsiders? Reese helped Margot carry her gear into the office. We need someone who knows how to handle digital evidence, someone who understands how to make this story bulletproof. Margot set down her laptop and looked around the office, her gaze lingering on the keyboard with its missing keys, the logbook with its torn page, the atmosphere of secrets kept too long. This place feels like a crime scene that never got investigated. Because it is. Over coffee that tasted like pennies, Reese showed Margot everything. The cassette tapes, the documents from the wall, Edmund's letters. Margot took notes in shorthand that looked like Arabic crossed with advanced mathematics, her pen racing across pages as Reese walked her through 3 months of discovery. When Reese played the first tape, Margot closed her eyes and just listened. When Garrett's voice cut off and the sound of violence filled the room, Margot's hand clenched around her pen hard enough to leave dents in her palm. Jesus, you have a recording of them killing him. We have a recording of someone being hurt. We don't have a body. Not yet. Dutch said it's in the basement. Dutch said he saw them carry something to the basement. That's not the same as proof. Margot opened her laptop, fingers already flying across the keys. What are you doing? Building a timeline, documenting everything. If we're going to do this, we need to be methodical. Journalists who cut corners get sued. Or worse. Quinn wandered in from room 3, her hair tangled from sleep, her yellow-painted fingers evidence of yesterday's work. She looked at Margot with the suspicion children reserve for new adults in their orbit. Who are you, Tassom? Margot, I'm a reporter. I'm helping your mom. Are you going to make the bad men go to jail? Margot glanced at Reese, then back at Quinn. I'm going to try on. Good. They hurt Mr. Brennan. Mom played me the tape. It was scary. Reese started to protest, but Margot spoke first. It was scary, but your mom is doing something brave. She's making sure what happened to Mr. Brennan doesn't happen to anyone else. Quinn considered this, then nodded and went to pour herself cereal from a box Dutch had brought. The drive to Portland took them through valleys where morning fog clung to the Willamette River like unfinished thoughts. Margot drove while Reese sat in the passenger seat, Quinn in the back, playing a game on a borrowed tablet. The volume muted. They'd left Dutch at the lodge with instructions to call if Victor showed up, if anything felt wrong, if the past tried to surface in new and dangerous ways. Evelyn Brennan was waiting outside First National Bank when they arrived. She stood beneath the building's modernist awning, a woman who'd carried grief so long it had become part of her skeleton. 74 years old, white hair pulled back in a style that suggested she'd stopped caring about fashion sometime in the 90s, eyes that had wept themselves dry, and then found new reserves. When she saw Quinn, she made a sound like something breaking. She's the same age. Connor was 8 when he didn't come home. Reese hadn't known what to say on the phone, and she didn't know what to say now. Grief is a country with no good maps, and she was a tourist trying to speak a language she'd only begun to learn. I'm so sorry for what happened. Evelyn shook her head. Don't apologize. You didn't kill him. You're the first person in 31 years who's tried to find out who did. Inside the bank, they were escorted to the vault by a manager who clearly thought this was irregular but couldn't find a regulation to prevent it. The safety deposit box was large, one of the old-style containers from before digital security, from when banks still believed in the weight of metal as deterrent. Evelyn's hands shook as she fitted the key into the lock. It turned with a click that sounded like a door opening in a house that had been abandoned, and when she lifted the lid, the smell of old paper and preserved time drifted out. Inside, 3 USB drives sat next to a leather-bound notebook that had been handled enough to wear the corners smooth. Beneath them, a letter in a sealed envelope with Evelyn's name written in handwriting that made the older woman close her eyes and breathe deep. I never opened it. I was too afraid. Afraid he'd written goodbye. Afraid he'd explain why he chose to leave. He didn't leave. He was taken. Evelyn opened the envelope with hands that had practiced this motion in dreams for 3 decades. She read in silence, lips moving slightly, tears tracking down her face in paths worn smooth by grief. When she finished, she handed the letter to Reese. The handwriting was neat, controlled the script of someone who'd learned to write reports and wanted to be understood. Evelyn, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home. I'm sorry, I tried. But what I found is bigger than I thought, and the people involved are more dangerous than I imagined. The USB drives contain everything, recordings, financial documents, photographs. But the real power isn't Victor Landry. He's middle management. The man behind everything is Clayton Mercer. He runs a criminal organization that launders money through real estate development across the Pacific Northwest. Cascade Development is just one piece. There are dozens more. Victor handles local operations. Warren Blackwood handles legal cover. Edmund Calloway provided meeting locations, probably without understanding what he was part of, at least at first. If I'm gone, wait. Wait until Connor is grown. Wait until he's safe. Wait until Mercer is in prison or dead. Then open this box. Then tell the truth. I love you. I love Connor. I'm sorry I won't be there to watch him grow up. Tell him his father died trying to do the right thing. Tell him that matters. Garrett, Margot was already connecting the first USB drive to her laptop, running antivirus scans, checking file integrity. The drive contained 47 audio files, each one labeled with a date and time. She opened the first one and Clayton Mercer's voice filled the small room where they'd gathered around Margot's screen. The Pine Ridge deal needs to close by October. We've paid enough to make it happen. Victor, you're sure the council members will vote our way? Victor's voice younger but unmistakable. 4 out of 5 are locked in. The fifth doesn't matter. We have the votes. And the environmental group that's been asking questions? We'll handle it. There's an investigator, some guy from Portland. We'll take care of him. Warren Blackwood's voice smooth as oil on water. Carefully, I hope. We don't need attention. We'll be discreet. The recording continued laying out bribes and payments, shell companies, and laundered money, a conspiracy so thorough it felt like architectural plans for corruption. Margot copied everything to her hard drive to the cloud, to 3 separate backup systems, working with the methodical precision of someone who understood that evidence is only as good as your ability to preserve it. The second USB held financial documents, spreadsheets showing wire transfers from companies with names like Pacific Northwest Development, LLC, and Cascade Holdings Group. The amounts were staggering, $2.3 million distributed across 14 transactions, each one carefully documented with dates and recipient account numbers. Victor Landry had received $450,000. Edmund Calloway, $75,000. The city council members had split the rest. The third USB contained photographs, dozens of them taken with a telephoto lens through windows and from parking lots. The grainy quality of surveillance work done before digital cameras made everything crisp and undeniable. Men in suits shaking hands, briefcases exchanged, and one photo timestamp October 9, 1993, 2:14 a.m., showing Victor and another man older distinguished, definitely Clayton Mercer, carrying something wrapped in plastic from a doorway that Reese recognized as room 6. In the background, barely visible, Edmund Calloway stood with his face in his hands. Margot looked up from her screen, her face pale. This is Pulitzer-level investigative journalism, but it's also a death warrant if they find out you have it. They already know. Victor has been texting me threats. Then we need to move fast, before they have time to destroy evidence or run. Quinn had been sitting quietly coloring in a notebook, but now she looked up. Mom, are we in danger? Reese wanted to lie, wanted to tell her daughter that everything would be fine, that adults would handle it, that 9-year-olds didn't need to worry about men who killed for money. But Quinn deserved truth even when truth was terrifying. Maybe, but we're being careful, and we're not alone. Back at the lodge, they spread everything across the office desk like archaeologists, reconstructing a civilization from fragments. Garrett's notebook was a masterpiece of investigative work, each page documenting meetings, phone calls, payments. He'd built a case that should have sent a dozen people to prison. Instead, it had gotten him killed. Margot worked through the night building a digital fortress around the evidence. She created redundant backups, encrypted files, dead man switches that would automatically release everything if they didn't check in every 12 hours. She contacted journalists she trusted, sending them encrypted packages with instructions not to open unless something happened to Reese or Margot. We're going to need more than evidence. We need spectacle. We need the kind of story that's too big to bury. Dutch had been quiet, working on window repairs, but now he set down his tools. There's something I haven't told you about that night. Reese and Margot both turned to look at him. October 9th, 3 in the morning, Edmund called me. He was crying, barely coherent. Told me to come to the lodge immediately, bring tools. When I got here, Victor and Clayton Mercer were in the courtyard. They'd just come from room 6 carrying a bag. A body bag, except it wasn't official. Just a tarp wrapped around something human-shaped. Dutch's voice cracked. Edmund was on his knees saying, I didn't know they'd go this far. Mercer told him to shut up, that he was part of it now, whether he liked it or not. They took the bag to the basement. I heard digging, then I heard a concrete mixer running. When they came back up, their hands were covered in wet cement. You saw them bury Garrett. I saw them bury something. Edmund told me later it was a leak repair, that we'd poured new concrete to fix a foundation problem. But the concrete in the basement, there's one section that's 30 years newer than the rest, right in the corner under where room 6 sits. Margot was already making notes. Can you show us exactly where the basement was darker than Reese remembered, the single bulb casting shadows that moved like living things? Dutch led them to the northeast corner, where the concrete floor did indeed look different, smoother, lighter in color, poured with less care than the original foundation. Here, this is where they dug. Reese knelt down, pressing her palm against the concrete. Somewhere beneath her hand, Garrett Brennan had been waiting 31 years for someone to care enough to look. We're going to excavate this. We're going to find him. And then We're going to make sure everyone knows what happened. Margot pulled out her phone already thinking logistics. We'll need to live stream it, document everything, make it impossible to cover up. Victor will try to stop us. Then we do it fast, and we do it publicly. He can't kill us if 10,000 people are watching. They planned through the night. Margot contacted journalists she'd worked with, sent anonymous tips to news organizations, created social media accounts that would automatically post evidence if anything happened to them. She built a machine designed to make truth inevitable. Dutch gathered tools, pickaxes, shovels, a jackhammer he borrowed from a friend who did demolition work. They would need to break through 6 inches of concrete, then excavate however deep the grave went. Evelyn arrived the next morning having driven from Seattle overnight. She looked at the basement, at the concrete floor, at the place where her husband had spent 3 decades in darkness. I want to be here when you find him. The text from Victor came at sunset. I know what you're planning. Don't. You have one more chance to take the money and walk away. After that, I can't protect you. Reese texted back. I don't want your protection. I want justice. His response was immediate. Justice is expensive. Ask yourself if you can afford the price. Then another message, this one with a photo attached. Quinn walking to the school bus that morning, her backpack bright yellow against the gray Oregon sky. The angle suggested it had been taken from a car parked across the street. Cute kid. Be ashamed if something happened to her. Reese's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the phone. Margot took it from her, read the messages, and her face went hard. We call the police. This is a direct threat. The police work for him. Dutch said the sheriff takes $50,000 a year from Cascade Development. Then we call the FBI. With what evidence? A text message. By the time they investigate, Quinn could be... She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't make the possibility real by speaking it aloud. Dutch had been listening from the doorway. We move up the timeline. We do the excavation tonight, right now, before Victor has time to act. It's not ready. We don't have all the media contacts lined up. The FBI hasn't. Then we work with what we have. You've already sent them the encrypted files. They'll be watching even if they don't know it yet. Margot was already setting up cameras, testing live stream connections, making sure the internet signal from Dutch's mobile hotspot would hold. I can have us live in 20 minutes, but once we start, we can't stop. If we find something, everyone will see it. If we don't find anything, we look like conspiracy theorists. We'll find him. Dutch knows where he is. At 10 p.m., Margot started the live stream. The viewer count began at 47 people who'd been following the anonymous social media accounts she'd created, people who'd gotten tips from journalists, people who'd stumbled across a live feed labeled Pine Ridge Truth. Reese faced the camera, her voice steady despite the fear curdling in her stomach. My name is Reese Calloway. 3 months ago, I inherited this lodge from my grandfather. What I found here is a crime that's been buried for 31 years. Tonight, we're going to unbury it. Dutch started the jackhammer, the sound echoing through the basement like thunder. Concrete cracked and shattered, pieces flying. Margot kept the camera steady, the viewer count climbing 150, 300, 500, climbing faster as people shared the link, as the algorithm recognized something happening in real time. 20 minutes in, the jackhammer broke through to earth beneath. Dutch switched to a pickaxe, working more carefully now, aware that they were close to something that deserved reverence. 30 minutes in, the pickaxe hit fabric. Dutch stopped, his face gray. Reese knelt down, brushing away dirt with hands that remembered how to be gentle. The fabric was dark blue, preserved by the concrete that had sealed it away from air and decay. She kept digging, exposing more of the shape until it became undeniable what they'd found. A human form wrapped in plastic that had yellowed with age, wearing a suit that had once been professional and was now a burial shroud. Margot's camera captured everything. The viewer count had passed 5,000. Reese found the wallet in the jacket pocket, the leather stiff and cracked but intact. Inside, a driver's license behind a clouded plastic window. Garrett Michael Brennan, born May 12, 1952, Portland, Oregon. The photograph showed a man in his 40s, dark hair going gray, kind eyes alive in a moment frozen 31 years ago. Evelyn's voice came from the stairs, broken and whole at the same time. That's him. That's my Garrett. The basement door slammed open. Footsteps on the stairs, multiple people moving fast. Reese looked up to see Victor Landry flanked by 4 men in suits with the kind of build that suggested they were more than lawyers. Behind Victor, moving more slowly, Clayton Mercer descended into the basement. 75 years old, impeccably dressed, his face showing no emotion except mild irritation. Margot kept the camera running. 8,000 viewers. 9,000. Victor's eyes found the excavation, found Garrett's remains, found the camera. You stupid bitch, you have no idea what you've done. Reese stood up, placing herself between Victor and the grave. I know exactly what I've done. I've found a murder victim, and 50,000 people are watching me do it. The viewer count had hit 12,000, climbing every second. Clayton Mercer's voice was smooth as poisoned honey. Ms. Calloway, this is unfortunate. We could have resolved this quietly. Instead, you've chosen spectacle. But spectacle without proof is just theater. And I have very good lawyers. I have your voice on tape confessing to murder. I have financial records showing bribes. I have photographs of you disposing of Garrett Brennan's body. Circumstantial, inadmissible, 30 years old. My lawyers will tie this up in court until you're bankrupt from legal fees. Margot spoke from behind the camera, her voice carrying across the live stream. 14,000 people are watching you threaten a witness right now. Clayton's expression flickered the first crack in his composure. He looked at the camera, at the red light that meant everything was being recorded, broadcast saved to servers around the world. Turn that off. No, I said turn it off. And I said no, you killed Garrett Brennan. You bribed city officials. You built an empire on corruption and murder. And now everyone knows. Clayton turned to his men. Destroy the cameras, all of them. They moved forward, but before they could reach Margot, sirens erupted outside. Not one or two, but dozens, an orchestrated response that filled the night with red and blue lights. Dutch smiled from where he stood near the stairs. I called the FBI 2 hours ago, told them we'd found a body and that the people responsible might try to stop us from reporting it. Turns out they were already interested in Cascade development. Something about a multi-state investigation into money laundering. The basement door burst open again, but this time it was federal agents in windbreakers, weapons drawn, voices sharp with authority. FBI, everyone on the ground now. Clayton Mercer didn't move, his face frozen in an expression of disbelief. Victor started to run, made it 3 steps before an agent tackled him into the dirt floor. Agent Rodriguez, 50-something, with eyes that had seen enough to be surprised by nothing, approached the excavation site and looked down at Garrett's remains. Ms. Calloway, this is an active crime scene. You should have called us before you started digging. I did call you 2 hours ago. I just didn't wait for permission. Rodriguez almost smiled. Your evidence package arrived this afternoon. Most thorough documentation of a criminal conspiracy I've seen in 20 years. We were preparing warrants when we got the call about the excavation. He looked at Clayton Mercer being handcuffed by 2 agents. Clayton Mercer, you're under arrest for murder conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda rights continued, but Reese stopped listening. She looked at Evelyn, who had sunk to her knees beside Garrett's grave, her hand touching the earth above her husband's remains. Quinn appeared at the top of the stairs, Dutch having kept her in the office during the excavation. She looked at the police, at the body, at her mother covered in dirt and concrete dust. Mom, did we win? Reese pulled her daughter close. Yeah, baby, I think we did. The live stream ended at 62 minutes. Final viewer count 47,291. The footage had been saved, shared, downloaded. It would be evidence in trials, the subject of documentaries, proof that truth, when given enough light, cannot be buried no matter how deep the grave. Outside news vans had arrived, journalists shouting questions. Rodriguez was giving a statement confirming the arrest, confirming the body, confirming that this was connected to a larger investigation that had been ongoing for months. Margot shut down her equipment, her hands shaking with adrenaline and relief. We did it. We actually did it. Reese looked at the basement, at the hole in the concrete, at the place where Garrett Brennan had waited 3 decades for someone to care enough to dig. No, he did it. We just finished what he started. The morning after Garrett Brennan's grave opened, Cedar Falls woke to find itself famous. National news trucks lined Main Street like metal locusts, satellite dishes pointed at a sky that offered no answers. CNN interviewed the owner of the diner. Fox News set up outside City Hall. NPR spoke to longtime residents who remembered 1993 and swore they'd always suspected something wasn't right about that development deal. Reese watched from the lodge office as reporters trampled what was left of the courtyard landscaping. Quinn sat beside her, quiet in the way children become when the adult world reveals itself as more complicated and dangerous than promised. Agent Rodriguez had stayed through the night, coordinating with forensic teams who'd erected a tent over the excavation site, who'd photographed and measured and documented every inch of concrete and earth. They'd removed Garrett's remains at dawn, treating the body with the reverence reserved for evidence, that might finally speak after decades of enforced silence. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his suit rumpled from a night without sleep. "We'll need your formal statement. All of you. Dutch, you especially, since you witnessed the burial. Am I going to be charged as an accessory? That's not my call, but you came forward voluntarily after 31 years of silence. That counts for something. The fact that you were threatened into silence counts for more." Evelyn had spent the night in room 3, the same room where Quinn had been sleeping, as if proximity to the child could somehow reverse time and give her back the years with Connor that Garrett's murder had stolen. She emerged now, her face puffy from crying but her spine straight. "When can I bury him properly, I mean?" Rodriguez softened in the way federal agents sometimes do when confronted with grief that has calcified into permanent weight. "After the forensics are complete. Could be weeks, could be months. But you'll get him back. And when you do, he'll have justice beside him." The press conference happened at noon on the steps of the Cedar Falls courthouse. Rodriguez stood at a podium, bristling with microphones while cameras clicked like insects. Reese stood to the side with Dutch and Margot watching as the FBI agent transformed 31 years of silence into official record. At approximately 10:15 p.m. last night, the remains of Garrett Michael Brennan were recovered from Pine Ridge Lodge. Mr. Brennan, a private investigator from Portland, was reported missing on October 10, 1993. Preliminary examination confirms the remains are consistent with his description and identification found at the scene. "We have arrested Clayton Mercer, age 75, and Victor Landry, age 45, on charges of murder, conspiracy, racketeering, and money laundering. Additional arrests are expected as the investigation continues." A reporter shouted above the others, "Is it true the body was found during a live stream watched by 50,000 people?" Rodriguez's expression suggested he had opinions about citizen journalism that he was professionally obligated not to share. Citizen. Calloway's documentation of the discovery has been helpful to our investigation. However, we strongly discourage civilians from excavating potential crime scenes without law enforcement present. Another reporter, this one from Portland. "Sources say Garrett Brennan was investigating corruption in a land deal. Is that connected to your investigation?" "I can confirm that Mr. Brennan was working on a case involving the sale of public land. The evidence he collected has proven valuable in a broader investigation into organized crime and public corruption across the Pacific Northwest." Margot leaned close to Reese, her voice barely audible. "He's not mentioning Cascade Development by name. That means they're going after the whole operation. How many people could that be? Based on what we found in Garrett and his files, dozens, maybe more." The questions continued, reporters circling like sharks who'd scented blood in Democratic waters. When it was over, Rodriguez approached Reese with the weary determination of someone who'd signed up for paperwork and gotten theater instead. "You should leave town for a while. Let this settle. Victor and Clayton are in custody, but they have associates who might not appreciate what you've done." "I'm not running. I'm not suggesting you run. I'm suggesting you don't make yourself an easy target. You have a daughter. Think about her." Quinn was back at the lodge with Dutch, who'd volunteered to stay with her while Reese dealt with the media circus. The thought of her daughter in danger of men like Victor deciding that revenge was worth the risk made Reese's chest tighten. How long until the trial? Could be a year, could be 18 months. White-collar cases move slowly, and this one's going to be complicated. Multiple defendants, 30 years of records to authenticate witness testimony that relies on memory degraded by time. "Will you need me to testify? Count on it. You found the body. You preserved the evidence. You're the thread that connects 1993 to now." That night, Reese sat in room 6 with the door open and the lights on the space no longer a tomb, but not yet transformed into anything else. She'd brought Edmund's letters, reading them again, now that she understood their full weight. Her grandfather had been a coward who became a witness, a man who'd chosen survival over morality and spent 3 decades paying the compound interest on that choice. She couldn't forgive him. Forgiveness required a transaction Edmund wasn't alive to complete, but she could understand. Fear makes monuments of small men and reduces giants to rubble. Her grandfather had been neither, just human, flawed, and ultimately sorry. Margot appeared in the doorway, laptop under her arm. "The story's gone national. We're trending on 3 platforms. The hashtag Pine Ridge Truth has been used 200,000 times in the last 12 hours. People love a conspiracy proven true. It's more than that. It's David versus Goliath. Single mother takes down criminal empire. It's the kind of story people need to believe still happens. Except I didn't do it alone." "No, but you're the face of it, which means you need to be careful. I've been monitoring social media. Most of it's supportive, but there are threats. People saying you're destroying a good man's reputation, that Clayton Mercer is a philanthropist, that you're doing this for attention or money. Victor's people trying to control the narrative. Probably, but it doesn't matter. The evidence speaks louder than PR firms. 6 months later, Reese stood in a courtroom in Portland, her right hand raised, swearing to tell the truth. The room was packed, every seat filled with journalists, legal observers, and people who'd driven hours to watch justice attempt what it had failed to do in 1993. Clayton Mercer sat at the defense table, flanked by lawyers who looked like they'd been assembled from catalog photographs of competence. He'd aged in custody, the orange jumpsuit and institutional haircut stripping away the veneer of respectability. Beside him, separated by 2 seats in an ocean of mutual betrayal, Victor Landry stared at the table, his jaw tight. The prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Chen, who'd built her career on RICO cases, approached the witness stand. Ms. Calloway, please tell the jury what you found at Pine Ridge Lodge on the night of October 15th, 2024. Reese had practiced this, had gone over it with Agent Rodriguez and with Chen's team, but nothing prepared her for the weight of speaking truth into official record. I found Garrett Brennan's body buried in the basement, beneath 6 inches of concrete that had been poured on October 9, 1993, the same night he was murdered. How did you know where to look? Dutch Carmichael told me he'd witnessed the burial, and the evidence Garrett left behind confirmed it. Chen displayed photographs on screens positioned around the courtroom. The excavation site, the remains, the wallet with Garrett's identification. Did you know the defendants before this investigation? Victor Landry is my uncle, my mother's brother. Did he try to prevent you from investigating? He offered to buy the property for less than it was worth. When I refused, he threatened my daughter. Clayton's lawyer objected, citing hearsay, but Chen had the text messages, had Victor's own words preserved in digital amber. What did the threat say specifically? Reese's hands clenched in her lap. He sent me a photo of my 9-year-old daughter walking to school. He said it would be a shame if something happened to her. He told me to sell and forget what I'd found. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd stopped being impressed by human depravity sometime during the Reagan administration, called for order. Chen continued through the evidence. The cassette tapes authenticated by audio forensics. The USB drives their files verified by digital analysts. The photographs that placed Victor and Clayton at the scene. Each piece built on the last, constructing a case that looked less like a theory and more like architecture. When it was the defense's turn, Clayton's lead attorney approached with the practiced skepticism of someone paid to disbelieve. Ms. Calloway, isn't it true you were unemployed when you inherited this property? Yes. Desperate for money. I had $800 in my bank account. And isn't it true that you were offered $200,000 for the property, but chose instead to pursue this investigation? I chose to find out why my grandfather spent 30 years writing apology letters to a man I didn't know was dead. A man you claim is dead. Isn't it possible these remains belong to someone else? That you've constructed an elaborate narrative to increase the value of your property through sensationalism? Chen objected, and the judge sustained, but the question hung in the air. Reasonable doubt is a garden that grows in the smallest cracks. Dutch testified on day 7, his voice steady despite the weight of confession. I saw them carry Garrett Brennan's body to the basement. I saw them pour concrete over the grave. Edmund Calloway told me it was foundation repair, and I pretended to believe him because I was scared. Because they'd killed a man for knowing too much, and I knew the same things. The defense tried to discredit him, pointing out that he'd waited 31 years to come forward, suggesting that memory becomes fiction over such expanses of time. But Dutch had details, the type of concrete mix they'd used, the tools they'd borrowed, the way Clayton Mercer had washed his hands in the lodge sink, and the water had run gray with cement. Connor Brennan testified on day 9, and the courtroom went silent. 41 years old now, a cardiologist in Seattle, he wore a suit that looked uncomfortable and carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who'd built a life on top of unresolved grief. When Chen asked him to identify his father, Connor looked at the photograph of Garrett taken from the driver's license, and his voice broke. That's him. That's my dad. When did you last see him? October 4th, 93. He was leaving for a work trip. He kissed my mom, hugged me, told me to be good. He promised he'd be home by the weekend. Did he come home? No. And I spent the next 28 years believing he'd chosen not to. Chen let the silence stretch, let the jury sit with the weight of a child's abandonment transformed into a murder victim's legacy. What did you believe happened to him? I thought he'd left us, that we weren't enough. My mom defended him, said something must have happened, but I was 8 years old and all I knew was that my dad was gone. I became a doctor because I wanted to be the kind of man I thought my father should have been. Reliable, present, someone who doesn't walk away from his family. And now, Connor's hands grip the witness stand rail. Now I know my father died trying to do the right thing, that he didn't abandon us, that he was murdered by men who cared more about money than about an 8-year-old boy losing his father. And I know that if these men had faced justice 30 years ago, my mother wouldn't have spent 3 decades wondering what she'd done wrong. She died last year still carrying that weight, still believing somewhere deep down that maybe she hadn't been enough to make him stay. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brief, perfunctory. Even lawyers have limits to what they'll savage. The trial lasted 3 months. Garrett's cassette tapes were played for the jury, his voice filling the courtroom with evidence recorded in terror and fading into violence. Forensic accountants traced money through shell companies and offshore accounts, building spreadsheets that proved corruption with the absolute authority of mathematics. FBI agents testified about the broader investigation, about 2 other bodies found buried at Cascade development sites, about a criminal empire that had operated for 30 years beneath the respectability of civic philanthropy. On a Tuesday in April, the jury returned after 11 hours of deliberation. The foreman, a man in his 60s, who'd taken notes throughout the trial, stood to read the verdict. In the matter of the People versus Clayton Mercer, count 1, murder in the first degree, guilty. The word landed like a stone in still water ripples, spreading through the courtroom. Evelyn made a sound that might have been a cobra, might have been relief, finding voice after 3 decades. Count 2, conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. Count 3, racketeering, guilty. The litany continued through 17 counts, each guilty verdict, another nail in a coffin Clayton had spent 30 years believing was sealed. Victor's verdict came next, equally thorough, equally damning. When it was over, both men sat frozen, their lawyers already filing papers for appeals that would take years and cost millions and ultimately change nothing. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. When that day came, she looked at Clayton Mercer with the cold assessment of someone who'd seen enough evil to recognize it without decoration. Mr. Mercer, you built an empire on corruption and murder. You showed no remorse. You attempted to intimidate witnesses even during this trial. You believed that wealth and influence placed you above consequences. You were wrong. She sentenced him to life without parole. He'd die in prison, and everyone in that courtroom would do it. Victor received 35 years. With good behavior, he might see freedom again. At 80, might spend his final years in a world that had forgotten him. Outside the courthouse, Evelyn stood with Connor facing a wall of cameras and microphones. She'd declined to speak during the trial, but now she had words that needed airing. Garrett Brennan was a good man, a father, a husband. He died doing what was right, and for 30 years his murder went unpunished. Today, justice finally caught up. It's late. It's 3 decades late, but it's here. Connor added his own weight to the moment. I grew up without a father because these men valued money over human life. My mother died believing my father had abandoned us. No sentence can give us back what was taken, but at least the truth is finally on record. Reese watched from the edge of the crowd, Quinn beside her. Her daughter had grown 4 inches in the past year, had started asking questions about justice and morality that didn't have easy answers. Mom, is it over now? The trial is over, but what comes next is up to us. Pine Ridge Lodge had transformed during the months of legal proceedings. Reese had used settlement money from a lawsuit against Cascade Development, money that represented a fraction of what the company had stolen, but enough to fund reconstruction to renovate the buildings. The 12 rooms that had once housed transient travelers now served different purposes. Rooms 1 through 5 became office space for the Truth Project, a nonprofit dedicated to investigating cold cases and supporting families of missing persons. Room 6 remained untouched, except for cleaning, transformed into a memorial space with photographs of Garrett and a timeline of events, a place where truth resided in permanent exhibit. Rooms 7 through 12 provided temporary housing for families visiting Cedar Falls to work on their own cold cases, offered free of charge, funded by donations that had poured in after the trial. The main office became a coffee shop and community gathering space. Quinn, now 10 years old and growing into the kind of confidence that comes from watching your mother refuse to back down, worked behind the counter on weekends, learning to make lattes and small talk in equal measure. Dutch had moved into a cottage Reese built on the property, a small structure near the tree line where he could see the lodge but maintain privacy. He taught woodworking classes to local kids, shared stories about Edmund with anyone who'd listen, the good stories and the complicated ones, the truth unvarnished by sentiment. Margot had stayed on as director of research, her master's thesis on investigative journalism, and cold cases becoming a book that was currently being developed into a documentary series. She'd gotten married to a forensic accountant she'd met during the trial, someone who understood that truth requires patience and precision in equal measure. The Truth Project's first-year results exceeded every expectation. 15 cold cases taken on 6, solved completely 4 with major breakthroughs. Families found answers. Police departments reopened investigations. The model Reese had built began spreading other organizations forming in other states, all dedicated to the principle that truth doesn't expire and justice doesn't have a statute of limitations. One afternoon in late summer, a woman in her 60s approached the lodge carrying a photograph. Reese was in the garden planting native species where the cracked asphalt had been torn up. Quinn was helping, her hands covered in soil, her face bright with purpose. The woman stopped at the edge of the garden, clutching the photograph like a lifeline. "Are you Reese Calloway?" "I am." The woman held out the photograph. A young woman, maybe 25, dark hair, bright smile, frozen in a moment before disappearance. "My sister. She vanished in 1987. The police said she probably ran away, but she had a 5-year-old daughter. She wouldn't have left her baby. Can you help me?" Reese took the photograph, studied the face of someone who'd been waiting 37 years to be found. "We can try. That's what we do here." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "That's all I'm asking. Just that someone tries." Quinn stood up from the garden, wiping dirt on her jeans. "We'll find her, ma'am. We always find them eventually, even if it takes a long time." The confidence in her daughter's voice, the certainty that truth was worth pursuing, no matter how long the search, made Reese's throat tight. This was the legacy they were building. Not just solving cases, but teaching the next generation that silence is not inevitable, that the past can be excavated, that voices silenced can speak again if someone is willing to listen. That evening, after the woman had left with her photograph and her hope, Reese walked through room 6. The space had accumulated meaning like sediment, each visitor leaving something behind. Notes on scraps of paper, flowers that dried and were replaced. Small tokens representing other losses, other searches. Quinn found her there, as she often did. "You okay, Mom?" "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" Reese gestured to the photographs on the wall, to Garrett's face, looking out from before fear, before violence, before 30 years of enforced silence. "About how we're not done, how there are so many more people like Garrett, so many families like Connor's, and how we get to help them." Quinn nodded, understanding, in the way that children raised on truth come to understand complexity earlier than most. "That's why we're here. That's why we're here." They walked out together, leaving the lights on in room 6 because darkness had ruled that space long enough. Outside, the garden stretched green and alive, native plants taking root in soil that had once been nothing but cracks and surrender. Dutch's cottage glowed warm in the distance. The lodge itself stood solid against the evening sky, windows gleaming purpose radiating from every restored board. Truth doesn't die when we bury it. It just waits. And when someone brave enough returns, when they're willing to dig through concrete and fear, and decades of looking away, the dead finally get to speak. Justice, however delayed, however imperfect, finally arrives. The lights in room 6 would stay on every night, a beacon for anyone still searching. A promise that here in this place that had once been a tomb, truth now lives.